In many cases, for all intents and purposes, a block wall or a cast-in-place concrete wall are interchangeable structures. I mean, they're resisting rot, they're providing strength, they're providing security. They can be treated so that they become a waterproof barrier. They behave and provide a very similar contribution to almost any structure. What this doesn't mean is that necessarily an 8-inch block wall is interchangeable with an 8-inch concrete wall. Now, they can be, depending on rebar and footing size and the use that you're putting them to and where you're located and the weather and whether it's above ground or below ground. So they can be one-to-one, apples to apples, or they can be, just about as clearly as anything you want to mention, apples to oranges. And so this is why it's a good idea not to assume that just because you're comfortable with one, that is the solution to every problem you might encounter in construction. I'm going to talk through some of the differences as I understand them between the two methods, particularly as it applies to this job, because we've used both processes, both materials, in similar situations, but with different outcomes on the site that I'm sitting on. This is an example of a cast-in-place concrete wall that I poured about a month ago. Behind me, there's a similar wall, taller, that I poured 2 years ago. And on the other end of this site, I've got a wall that I poured about the same time as this wall, only it's 8 feet high. And all three of these walls, functioning as one retaining wall system, are busy holding back the dirt and making a place for the water to collect and get put into a drain and go out to the street. They're retaining walls. And I did a little bit of work to make sure they were a little more attractive and some reveal strips, and they sort of illustrate that concrete can be used in the toughest situations, but you have to take a little trouble to make concrete anything other than concrete. But there are a wide range of things that you can do to make it more attractive, like an incredibly wide range. One of the characteristics of pouring a concrete wall is it's an exciting process, because when it's showtime, when the concrete is going into the forms, there's all sorts of things that can cause real trouble all at once. And once that pouring action starts, you can't interrupt it until that pour sequence is done. This is different than block in several ways. Block can also be very strong. It can also be very resilient. It can be somewhat dynamic, and you can control the cracking, and it can retain dirt, and it can be made waterproof. But it happens incrementally. It happens one block at a time. So the act of making the wall is less stressful. There's less pressure. There's less urgency about the cleanup and the scheduling and the sequencing of materials, because it's not going up any faster than the masons, or perhaps you're going to try it, can make it happen with their 2 hands and their trowel and mixing the mud. It's an incremental process. Sometimes that's a relief. It's fascinating to me. There's an element of romance and nostalgia around the fact that laying block or brick, masonry, is essentially unchanged. I mean, in its fundamental characteristics, it's unchanged for hundreds of years. Now, CMU is a relatively recent adaptation, but bricks have been being made since the Israelites were making, mud bricks along the Nile. Egyptians were making blocks and bricks a long time ago, and many other cultures were also. And the tools that were used to put those masonry units together then are very similar to the tools that are used to put them together now. Anybody can afford to buy those tools. Doesn't take a lot of room to store them. You can get them all to the job in the back of your car, sort of, and with practice anybody can use them. Way different with concrete, particularly with wall form systems. Before you even begin to think about the concrete itself, you have to have an entire framer's toolkit in your truck to build the forms to hold the concrete. You're going to encounter all kinds of situations where you have to manipulate wood or form systems in order to hold the concrete securely, perfectly securely. And then, if you're going to use a wall form system like I did, you have to either buy or already have or rent or borrow that form system, and you have to haul it. And so understanding that the molds are a very technical process, we haven't even touched on the concrete tools themselves. There are oil sprayers, there are concrete pumps, there are vibrators, there are just an infinite variety of trowels and floats and screeds and derbies and there's just all kinds of stuff. And the more you have, the more prepared you are for unforeseen moments that come up with concrete, because that is one of the big differences between a concrete wall and a CMU wall, that a concrete wall is going to have all sorts of unforeseen and stress-laden decisions to be made in the moment. There's a lot of variables with a concrete wall.